Hi, everyone. Welcome to our third deep dive into higher education and student affairs in academic advising. My name is Isabel Wright, and I'm the Career Services Specialist here at Rossier, and I'm excited to have Ryan Alcantara, the Career Services Manager, as well as our guest speaker, Jen Wong, on the call. Hi, everyone. So before we get started, a few housekeeping items. If you all can scan the QR code to check in, that would be greatly appreciated. The format of today's event will consist of me asking a few structured questions, as well as opening it up to the audience for Q&A. If we can all have our cameras shared, that would be very helpful. It's nice to see your faces and see who's on the call. And we highly encourage you all to ask questions, whether in the chat, I will try to monitor that, or on camera if you'd like to raise your virtual hand. With that said, let me go ahead and read Jen's bio and we'll get to it. So Jen is a senior academic counselor, graduate program coordinator, a Southern California native. Jen received her BA in public relations and advertising at Chapman University and worked in publicity and marketing in the music, health and wellness, travel and gaming industries. Realizing that she wanted a career change to higher education, Jen earned her MED in the PASA program at USC. While a graduate student, she worked in orientation, academic advising, career advising, and focused her fieldwork on international student programming and study abroad. After completing her degree, Jen worked as an international advisor for sponsored Kuwaiti students at the Consulate General of the State of Kuwait. Missing the flurry of student activity on a campus, Jen returned to USC as an academic advisor and was promoted to assistant director for advising at the USC Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. In fall 2018, she went south to UC Irvine to join the Arts Student Affairs team. She currently advises undergraduate and graduate students in the UCI Claire Trevor School of the Arts. In her spare time, Jen enjoys binge watching movies and shows, eating, traveling, hanging out with her family, and cheering or yelling for her favorite soccer team, Chelsea FC. Jen, take it away.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Thank you everyone for taking the time, I know during your lunch, during your busy schedules, to join us today. I look forward to seeing all of you in the field when you graduate. So it's exciting to kind of come back to USC and kind of share my experiences around there. So as Isabel said, I'm currently the Senior Academic Counselor and Grad Program Coordinator at the Claire Trevor School of the Arts. So think of it this way: if you're familiar with USC, you have, I think, the Kaufman Dance School, you have Roski, you have Thornton, and then you have the Dramatic Arts School. That's under the umbrella. So I advise all four disciplines. I can get a lot, especially, you have a lot of performance and visual arts, if any of you are familiar with those areas. But we are one of the smaller schools. Combined, we have about 1,000 students, so about 120 graduate students, which fall under me, and then as well as the rest of the field. So, all those 880 students are undergraduates. The roles in both areas, so I kind of straddle both lines. Roles in both areas are different, but I do focus a lot mostly with my undergrad, which becomes the programming, whereas with the graduate, I'm mostly like the liaison with our graduate division, making sure that they get their thesis and dissertations in on time. So kind of like hand-holding that part of it. Current roles that I do, responsibilities, about 10 to 15% of my role is actually advising. It's actually kind of weird how that evolves to that. I do love meeting students face to face. I love seeing them, even remotely, talking with them, learning about them. I think that's kind of the cool parts of the job, is just kind of being a part of a student's journey as they get through academically. But a lot of my time is spent actually on data analysis, scheduling. I do a lot, I take part, and this is on me to help out my rest of my colleagues. And I actually work in an office of 3. That's what I need to mention. I have 3 professional staff. So I have my director, me, and my other advisor. And then I also have 3 peer academic advisors that we hire every year. So they are trained to help out with their peers too. So I do manage them, as well as, I've taken on a lot of our recruitment and marketing too. So we kind of work in conjunction with main use the admissions. At USC, every school has an admissions department. That's not how it is at UCI. But for us in the arts, we kind of still do, it falls into our plate. Even though we're not admissions officers, we still also do a lot of the recruitment. So going out to the art schools and things like that. So I do that marketing, help out with our marketing team, making sure students understand that process because there's, supplemental work outside of the big UC application. I also do the finances, budgeting for our office, and a lot of faculty wrangling. So there's a lot of things, if you're a person who likes to do Jack Jane of all trades, this is kind of a fun role. So it's never boring, I could tell you that. And essentially, I think of it as like if you're familiar with basketball, it's like zone coverage, just filling in the gaps within the team that needs coverage too. But mainly what my main responsibility or what I feel like is the main thing that as our office is that we interpret school policies for students and faculty and staff, and that we can be that centralized hub to explain all those things to them.
Great, thank you. You have quite an interesting professional background. I've thoroughly enjoyed watching you move through your career. Can you share some insights on your experience in Rossier, and specifically when you were a graduate student working in the different areas like orientation, academic advising, career advising? How did you ultimately land in career advising, given everything that you had experienced?
So for me, I like to probably like a lot of us like to experience all different things and kind of figure out because I really wasn't quite sure exactly what area. And I think that was kind of the nice thing about PASA was that it allowed me to explore different opportunities. As an undergrad, I was kind of in those kind of student leadership roles. I was in Greek life. I was involved in orientation leadership as my undergraduate at Chapman. And even further back in like high school and middle school, I did those things. I like the whole process of onboarding. That's what we call now, right? Where it's like you're introducing a group of folks, this new process, this new system, and you're welcoming them in. So I kind of essentially like am drawn to that. And so um, when I graduated undergrad, I was a little bit, not sure what I wanted to do, kind of explore, trying to go with my major. But I realized I really liked enjoying, connecting people with information. And I've kind of kept that. So, whatever industry I was in, it was still the same thing. And I see I do that now too. So when I did PASA, I honestly wasn't sure. I was coming from working for this huge gaming company, but I knew that I was like, okay, I really want to help out others to understand and just to decipher you know, what college is and what it means and how it's not just taking classes. It's not just this, there's a lot to it because of just my exploration. So that was kind of what I wanted to do, make sure I covered everything. I was a part of orientation at USC. That was a big thing to be a part of. And I particularly worked with the side of working with all the academic advisors and all the units. That was really an introduction and a great networking opportunity because that led me to not only interning at, what is it, at the college, at Dornsife. It wasn't even called Dornsife then. That was way back when, but at Dornsife, and I think I started, I asked, I was like, hey, instead of, field work, can I actually be an intern in your office? And luckily with Dr. Hawkins, she's, Beyonda, if you know her, great person to know. She was the one who's like, yeah, let's get you on board and let's have you be an intern. So that was a great start for me. And then I also had the opportunity to do career services in Viterbi. And that was great because it was completely STEM to kind of see how that works, how the cycle of internships and things like that work for the STEM students and how it's very different from what I experienced. So I just wanted to touch everything. I wanted to learn everything and take as much as possible. It did get overwhelming at times, but it's just, I think the best advice getting from Professor Tambasia was, you're finding the job, you're getting the job to help you land that second job. So what are the skills are you going to learn from here that'll help you get the second job? And the first job it may not be the one you want, but what are you going to learn here that's going to help you carry on to the next one? So that's pretty much that philosophy carried me through.
Great, thank you. And can you touch on when you were working as an international advisor, what was that like, and how did you transition from that to your academic advisor role at USC?
So being an international advisor at an independent, so away, and I think it's kind of sometimes a challenge. You're like, I don't want to get out of the groove of being in a formal 4 year or what's typically of, the higher ed route. So I stepped out to do advising for what is for sponsored students. So we have these students who are sponsored by countries to come to the US to study. So it's such an interesting process, and not being in a campus, it was really interesting. So you kind of touched based on everything. So not only were you advising, somewhat say, making sure you have your visa that's valid, make sure this is working, make sure we get this I-20. So kind of working with a lot with the international offices. So what happens is that the office I was in, we handled West Coast schools all the way up to like Montana. And then there was also a DC office. So it was, sponsored by the embassy and the consulate of the country of Kuwait. And so we kind of split between both, the schools between there. So we would help students apply to schools, help them get through their English language programs, TOEFL, IELTS. So it was just a lot of like hand-holding step-by-step process, which a lot of, things to kind of explain to someone who is not used to the US system and how to explain that everything to them, making sure. So you kind of touched every aspect of that student, and their progress within the US and, dealing with things where they may have to take leaves or they may have to step out. So, it was a lot of learning, a lot of like, okay, something's new is going to happen every day. The only thing is that most of my interactions with these students were also on either email or phone, because a lot of them may be in Montana. I'm not going to see them. And this was pre-Zoom, and not really using Skype. So it was very interesting. I think I really improved my email writing skills to control the tone. So from that experience. But I was concerned, I'll be honest, with the transition back to a normal campus. I think that was the worry that I had, that I was pushed myself too far out, that I couldn't come back in. But I think that's changed a lot in our industry, where folks are more welcomed of, students, or, of folks coming back, from having different experiences and being able to do certain tasks, so I used my network of having worked with a lot of the academic advisors at USC to say, hey, what's open? As a job opening, I'm ready to come back. So kind of utilizing that network a lot, kind of going back to Dr. Hawkins, going, back to, at the time, Dr. Cindy Martinez in Annenberg, and just kind of feeling it out to see, hey, I want to, like, just putting it out there, I want to come back. Is there a place for me? And so that really did help with my transition back to USC. I don't know if I would have a different experience, if I didn't utilize that network. And that was really essentially, why I really did the PASA program as well.
Great, thank you. How you touched on when you were in the PASA program, just different areas, orientation, academic advising, career advising. How how did you manage your time with all the coursework and everything for good question for EC and PASA folks. How did you expose yourself and get all that experience, but also, keep up with your coursework and network and all the other demands?
To be honest, I think my fall semester was when it all came to head, because I think I was also doing the student organization too, so as part of my field work. So, um, honestly, there was a point where I was sick, I was not doing well, I was not taking care of myself, and I really stretched myself apart. But, I think communication is clearly important. Talking with your faculty, talking with the folks who you're working with, and saying, hey, look, I may not be able to come in this day because of this. What do I need to make up to do to make sure? And I think, what did help, that having my supervisors fully understanding, because I think with all these roles, it was very fresh for a limited time. I think the one role that I did take the longest, or was able to do the longest, was probably advising, for both career and for academic advising, whereas orientation was kind of short-lived. There was a time frame too. To do that. I mean, there was a new series, they had their own cycle of who they hired. And that was pretty much the challenge, was making sure that I was trying to do too much, recognizing I was doing too much, because my body forced me to say, hey, you need to stop. But acknowledging that if you do take too much on your, as a caseload, that it's okay to pull back, as long as you're communicating why. And I feel like in our industry, we're very understanding of that.
Great, thank you. So now touching on your current role, what does a typical day in your role look like, and what does a non-typical day look like?
So typical day is always the emails, right? Which is really funny because I know my students hate looking at emails, but that's pretty much how we run. I know. I'm like, but I'm not doing Discord, guys. I'm not doing this. I'm also not doing Slack. Um, but I do, it's like emails, and then also I'm a millennial, an elder millennial, so I like to ignore my phone. I'm very text-based, so a lot of communication is through emails or in person. I have scheduled appointments or students who walk in. It's very free flowing and very opposite compared to what I had at Annenberg, where Annenberg or at USC in general, they have require students. It's mandatory advising. We don't have that. We tell our students, you're grown-ups, you're adults. We expect you, if you need help, we're here. So if you need help, come see us. I mean, in the beginning, we do handhold a little bit more, but we give the thought, we're like, we're here, we want you to come see us. We want you to think of us as like, we're another doctor's appointment you need to go to, or all these things. So be a part of that. Also training my peers, if there's something that they need to go through, since they handle our general email, I look through the work with them. So I'm always kind of constantly advising them too. So not only just doing my work, but also seeing what their work is to make sure that they're saying the correct information. Because physically, they're right across from me, and from my office, I could see them. They greet our students, so it's easy for me to do that. Plan any workshops or upcoming event with colleagues. Work with anything having to do with grad to see any students who are outstanding, because they have a little more stricter rules than they do for undergrad. And then sometimes I'm not to put, so I actually am very, very fortunate. I do have a hybrid position. So I will come into work, I do like going in, I do like that ritual of going into work, having that. Sometimes it's missing that space. Also being able to talk with my colleagues. I do like them. I do like faculty in them too. And then I do actually have the opportunity at home, and I can say that I'm at home today and being able to still communicate with my student peers who are there on campus. But the only thing from at home is my dog just comes and interrupts me wanting to be pet, which is not a bad thing. So, but it just also depends. It goes through cycles, like fall quarter. So we are on the quarter system at the UC or at UCI. And so right now we're in our first week of school. I know you all are like, oh, we're already in week 5, Jen. We're week 1. And so it just depends. Like fall tends to be really busy. Winter tends to be everyone's like, oh, I got to be academic. So head down, we do everything. And then spring gets busy again because you have the end of the year, commencement, all that stuff too. And, preparing for summer, preparing for orientation. So yeah, it's can be different every day. Some days are slower than others, but you appreciate those gaps sometimes. I know that was a challenge sometimes, even in Annenberg, when we had to do our block mandatory advising, because it'd be 2 months of just like appointments back to back to back to back. And that was pretty draining, to be honest. And I feel like now in my role, in my position, I have a little bit more like, oh, I feel like I can, I'm not missing a lot of things. I'm not trying to just get things done. Even though we do have a high volume of students, it's just a little bit more manageable.
Great, thank you. You sort of touched on this with orientation and academic advising, but who are your key collaborators, and how is
Mm.
their background and roles different or similar than to yours?
I was very spoiled being an advisor at USC, and I think USC has a very strong advising core. Like it is respected within the university, and I know that some places they're not, or there's not much of a voice. And sometimes there's that struggle, and I can be honestly say that there is sometimes that struggle being at a state school. You kind of need allies within faculty who trust you, who say, oh yes, let talk to Jen about it. They can talk to you more about that. And so I think when I first started, it was really a challenge. That was one of my goals, is saying, okay, my goal is to make sure that faculty know that they can send students to me, and that I know, I'm well aware of, policy and things like that too. So that it also helps my director, which they always default to talking to, like, oh, wait, if I can't reach her, I can reach Jen. So that was my main goal, is to kind of help deflect that from my supervisor, because she can get overwhelmed with that when it could be a simple question that even I can answer. So mostly, so faculty within the school, advisors across campus, having allies is great because not only do they help you kind of like, oh, how do you interpret this policy? Oh, okay, so we can kind of tweak it to make sure it's consistent, right? And I think that's always the challenge too, is being consistent so that you're not written up in Reddit that, oh, this advisor told me this. And yeah, so another piece of advice, make sure when you write your emails that it's not going to be posted on Reddit. That's kind of a scary thing too, because they have that access to do that. But you know, advisors across campus to kind of see, making sure that we're all doing things the same. Also, too, registrar's office. I actually also for a while did some scheduling, so helping to schedule at the school, schedule classes, so working with those teams. Also, for us, we actually have designated campus social workers for students that we can refer to. So knowing those teams as well, disability services, anyone that you can find that's an ally that you can always, you know, we use Teams on our campus so that you can ping them and say, hey, I have a quick question. I think having that access to that, it's great to be able to have those allies, and it takes work, you know, to kind of understand who are those key players across campus that you can access that would have the information you need to be a better advisor. And it's great too to share experiences. You know, I think everyone is at a different level. You'll see that not everyone attended like an EE or a PASA type program. Some folks just fell into those, you know, but I think a lot of that is changing as folks of that age group is starting to retire more. We have folks who are going up to these director levels who may just who have the masters or may have their EDD or PhD level into director levels, and even moving into some advisors may have their EDD, PhD, or their master's degrees. So it's becoming, you know, more and more as we've seen a lot more into growing into that industry. So yeah, that's really kind of the trend that I've been seeing.
Great, thanks. Now, what are the biggest challenges in your role, and how have you overcome those, or what strategies are you developing or working on to address them?
We don't have enough time. So um, I think the biggest challenge as someone who likes to do work smarter, not harder philosophy, is that it's not always easy that way, right? There's always these complicated or, you know, bureaucratic ways that can get in the way of trying to make certain progress, especially when you're trying to advocate for a change in either a processy or just something within the program that you know will definitely benefit the student. And then it's just sometimes, you know, you're kind of butting heads because we see the students, we see the challenges that come in, but then when administration doesn't acknowledge that or doesn't understand why, or just see it that way, that's just, you know, a difference in, you know, of how they want to do things, you know. And it can come to curriculums, you know, and it can come to, hey, we need you to offer more of this class because students are not getting this class and they're not making progress towards the degree, and that impacts matriculation. So you kind of have to do that, and that's all built by data. Or if just something can't be streamlined just because of how, you know, our systems are built, you know, electronically or whatever. So that is always the butting of heads. And I've worked with other faculty, you know, other advisors. For example, we use, I know, you know, private schools don't use it as much, but for the Cal States, the community colleges and UCs, we use a thing called assist.org. And that's where it helps with the students with what classes will count as transferable, what courses will help with what we have the intersegmental. I can't say the whole thing, but it's the GE equivalencies, right? And that thing is really hard to read. And so we were trying to figure out this collective group of advisors independently without having to say it, trying to figure out a way, how can we make this easier so that when students come to our departments asking, hey, would this class count towards this? We would have a centralized database internally that we could do that. So it's just kind of those things where we're trying to work on systems for ourselves of working our way around it and finding ways to make messaging clearer for our students, you know, about certain processes. And that's always tough too, is just trying to figure out, okay, the university sees it this way, but we're trying to explain it to you this way so you understand. That's always can be the challenge too. Other challenges, and I think we're just coming out of it. My colleagues and I were just reflecting on the cohorts coming in. It's a big jump. For me, it's like, okay, I'm about, 20 now years beyond them. So my thoughts, my relationship with them are a little bit different. And I think also coming out from, the pandemic and everything, there's just that sense of institutional knowledge that was lost during that time is coming back. So the anxiety is not as up here. It's kind of regulated a little bit because we see students aren't so stressed. They're actually really excited, more happy to be here. So that's kind of one thing that we've noticed that I'm really happy that we're kind of going through, that the institutional knowledge is coming back, the sharing information with amongst students. Um, and one way of also kind of figure out those kind of challenges of kind of our student groups coming in, for the past couple of years, I've actually been an admissions reader. That was very insightful. I know. So also you get paid. So being an admissions reader is a great way to see what students are coming in. I don't know. We actually have access to our admissions records to kind of look to see more so that we could see transcripts and communication that's been sent out. So it's really been helpful for us as a tool, especially for orientation. When we do advising, it's like, oh, you got a 4 on this AP course. Okay, then you can not have to register for this class. So those kind of logistical things. But I think being an admissions reader is just kind of see what type of students are coming in, what are their expectations, what are they seeing, has been really helpful, and kind of had insight of like, okay, I can see how this is coming, and to see, is this student going to fit in this type of area? So I don't make the decisions. I just, look through them and grade them. And I think that's a great opportunity. But again, like I said, you get paid too. If you do want to go to your undergraduate degree, and kind of help out with admissions to see that process, it's kind of interesting, to do that. So being able to do that has been really, really enlightening.
Great, thanks. Um, I've actually never worked at a public institution before, so
Mhm.
I would like to know what are the differences in the hiring process, and in your role as an academic advisor in a private four-year like USC
Mhm.
and an academic counselor in a four-year public like UCI. So hiring process, what are the differences? And just in general, you sort of touched on it with roles, but I guess I'll start with the hiring process because I know we have folks interested in both.
Yeah. So I personally did not come from a public institution. Both my undergraduate and graduate degrees are in public. So it was a big, or it wasn't public, it was private. So it was a shock and not a shock. I think what it could be is just different, right? And just us understanding systems. Like in my head for like the first year, I was like, okay, remember, this is not USC. We do things differently, right? And even, and just understanding like, okay, but also being able to bring, oh, we use this when I was an advisor here, I think it would work here, and so implementing certain things would work there. The So how I got my role at UCI, I actually I had met up with my former cohort mate at a Nakata, Nakata Regional. And yes, I recommend if to please participate and join in those. But a Nakata Regional, and I had mentioned I want to go back home. I want to be close to home because I've been commuting from Irvine to USC. Yes, that train life, to go to work and everything. But I also had a family, and I wanted to be home and be closer. So she reached out to me and said, hey, we have a job opening. And I'm like, all right, I'm using my PASA network. So when I first initially started, my director is a PASA alum, and she was also a PASA alum. So it's kind of scary. UCI has a lot of PASA, a lot of Rassier alum here. It's kind of crazy. I mean, even some of the student affairs folks have taught at Rassier too. So there's a big connection there. So that's how I got that, that opening saying, we want to hire, do you want to come down? And so that's how I applied. I think it was about 2 rounds, for me. And I know it's different. It depends on every school. Some do a couple other rounds. And I think also for higher level, you do a lot of like day visits or everything if you're more at like the associate assistant dean levels. So but mine was just simple 2 rounds. I had a group interview with not only the supervisor, other advisor, but then also the other folks in the departments that we would be working closely with. And then it was finally with again, another round two with just the director from some clarification and some things like that. So I think it was a little bit more not very atypical of what probably a lot of the different advising or even, student affairs hiring levels there too. But it was hard. I was worried about the whole, oh, I don't have any, public school or public university experience, but just talking about what we have done, advising my philosophy. I think that's a big one too, of what is your advising philosophy? What's your um, kind of what your values are? And I think that was also the reason why I really, wanted to be a part of that team too, of just the values and kind of aligning with the team and making sure that that's kind of what you want to be in. Because, I know some folks were just like, I will take any job, just to get down there and then make my way and move within the institution. And that does happen a lot. Some folks do, department hop, or they even go to other departments. So it's not just advising. I think, what's very different in some areas, and they used to see a little bit at USC, but we also have departmental, staff. So you have what we have is the MSO, which is our department manager, who helps the chair of the department do all the TA shifts, all that stuff, or helping managing classes, and then a departmental analyst. So there's a lot of also roles that are more internal. You will have some student, but you do a lot of the behind the scenes of like making sure students are in the class, helping support the faculty, having facilities available, all that stuff too, is that you can transition into. And that I have a lot of students who were formerly my peers who have either transitioned to, and I tell them, I said, go do your artwork, do your, what you want to do first, and then come back to advising. We'll always be here, don't worry. But I've been lucky enough to have actually a couple students who've gone through advising. I actually had one who actually did do PASA and was working at the Title IX office at USC for a while, and now is in the law school at UCI. So they come back, which is nice to see. But I think, again, that network really does help, and knowing people and using this time to kind of facilitate. And of course, there's going to be some cohort members you kind of not keep tabs on or anything. And that just happens. It's just natural things. But, it really does help when you say it out there that I'm looking for a job at this location or this area. And if they think of you, like, oh, yeah, it really does help out.
That's incredible. I love that. Just knowing that the Trojan network, the Trojan family is alive and well, and it's really just, the proactive approach to utilize it and to take advantage of that. So thank you.
Yeah.
Very,
Mhm.
very insightful. Can you speak on the differences between counselor versus advisor in a 4-year and versus a 2-year community college? Just speak on that title and kind of the differences or similarities.
Yeah, so I honestly think it's kind of a matter of semantics because in the community colleges, we know, counselor, it's a different role. You're also considered faculty at a community college, right? So, and I know some of you, if you're looking for those jobs, they're really hard to get, and they may go through an extensive interview process. But at our campus, like I remember, so USC uses advisor. And they even have either council academic advisors. But at UCI, we actually use it interchangeably. And I know there's counselor in my title, but we use advisor and we refer, as our group as a collective. Oh, yeah, let the advisors know. So, like, even the directors advisors meeting, we're not considered counselor, we're not called counselor, even though it's in our title. I don't know if they're going to make a change to that. But even our peer students, it's peer academic advisors too. So it's used interchangeably. I think, with, more of counseling coming through, I think there should be a distinction because for students coming to me, they're like academic counselor, they may think, oh, therapist counselor. And I'm like, oh, no, 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 I'm not, I'm not there. A lot of the stuff you're telling me, that you might want confidential is not. I'm a mandated reporter. I have to report this to, my supervisor and things like that, if I feel like this warrants that too. So we want to make sure that, if you go to student health center to talk to a therapist counselor, that's that there too, or, things like that. So I think it's just the evolution of the counselor, where it is, we are counseling, but we're also more advising, but just what areas and what industries it's tied to, I think is kind of important to that. And we do make sure that we give them that distinction as well when we do our orientation or do any messaging, like, hey, or if they're about to tell us something, we will let them know, hey, so just so you know, I'm a mandated reporter. I need to tell, if anything you tell me that I feel that needs to go to our Office of Diversity and Equity or needs to go to conduct, then I need to tell them. So those are those things that you kind of have to separate as semantics, and sometimes it's just as explaining, which is what we do a lot of, right? It's just explaining and kind of clarifying things. But that's pretty much, my experience. And even in USC, yeah, I was advisor. Yeah, that's mostly it.
Isabel, let me just jump in and appreciate that clarification, Jen. The one
Mhm.
thing that I'll mention too, just in terms of community college, while a lot of it, the role is similar between an academic advisor and a counselor in that space. Um, they they are very keen. If you're talking about academic advising, you want to use the word counseling in that, because that's an important piece. And in terms of qualifications, oftentimes that's accompanied by either training and or experience
Mhm.
where you're doing counseling work. And so we cover that a lot in the EC program, but for those PASA students that are interested in working in the community college, you've got to really make sure you understand those qualifications, because those faculty roles have specific state mandated
Mhm.
qualifications that are a part of it.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Jen. Let's hear from the audience. I definitely have more questions to ask, but I want to make sure that we have time for the students who are on this call to ask questions. And if not, no worries. We can also, I'll be managing the chat as well. I'll continue to manage it. So I'll continue with my questions. Jen, how do challenges related to equity, power, and privilege manifest in your work?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, like I kind of touched a little bit on it, is academic structure and university structure and where they put value in, um, is kind of a big thing. I think at USC, I felt like as a staff member, um, I felt like the faculty respected a lot of what we did, and I really appreciate that. And it comes from the top. We had a very strong vice provost, or at the time, who was really supportive of advising. Would really say, "Okay, we work together. We're trying to do one thing together. We're trying to have this goal." So I think that was kind of, it's very very rah rah. I think also too, for USC, and that's just could be because it's a private school. And so there's not these other mechanisms in play. Whereas being at USC, or UCI, sorry, we kind of answer to the regents, right? So that's the bigger, they oversee all the 10 schools, across California. So even though we're different schools, amongst ourselves, but we still have to answer to those bigger rules and things like that too. So that can be a lot of dragging of the feet, or the hope for progress is very much slowed down. And that's kind of a hard thing for me too, but I've learned to work within it. So again, it's just having that key faculty folks, the key folks who are part of academic senate, where they recognize, and in administration too, who recognize and acknowledge the work that you do, really gives you a big factor on, really helps with you get the support you need to support the students, right? If you have a dean who supports your role and they ask you, what do you need from me to make sure that this is a good experience for students? Or what do we need to clarify? That really does help. And we do have these conversations with the chair. I just remember sending an email last and be like, hey, is there any way you can offer this course? Because this is what we're seeing. And so the chair will go back to the faculty and kind of talk about that stuff to see if they can do that. And it's hard because faculty are hired at universities not necessarily always to be teaching, and this is coming from a public research one, and so they're not always teaching. They're also doing their own research from their own groups. So that's kind of, I see that a lot more at being at a UC. I didn't see that as much at USC, but I also was in a program that was very technical. It was it was journalism, it was communication, it was PR. You had all hands on deck. Everyone was so in tune. It was, oh, I think it was a little hyper in tune, but it was just a different environment. So kind of adjusting to that was a challenge, and to kind of say, okay, this is where the play is, and kind of adjusting yourself, to see how you can navigate that as well. So that is kind of the challenge, and it's still constant, and kind of the a little bit sometimes of the mental gymnastics of having to deal with that within just an institution, and just trying to say, I'm here, I'm important, and my work is important that I do, because without us, then, this support goes away. So kind of having to nicely nudge and let them know that we're trying to help you too, if you help us out.
I love that. Mental gymnastics, ever evolving, building building strength and also being flexible. All right, Princess has a question. Go ahead, Princess.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you for coming today and meeting with us to share a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are. I'm Princess. I'm a full-time passive student here at USC, and I was wondering, specifically, what part of the PASA program do you think prepared you most for the position that you're in? And I mean, and that could be classes or just a specific part. And also if there are any classes or courses that you still find yourself thinking about or drawing connections to in your work today.
So I think it was actually to kind of what kind of lead me toward advising was actually my academic advising class. And I think I took that with Lynette, with Dr. Merriman. And it's actually really funny. I actually presented at a conference using Dr. Merriman's PhD dissertation, talking about parents and their involvement and how it kind of creeped into advising. So that was really fun. So I do look back on that because she just brought so much of her experience, as well as allowing that space to kind of see, okay, advising is not linear. It's this, it's this all-encompassing thing. And then it was just something where I was like, yes, that's what I'm drawn to, and doing that too. And I was actually really lucky to be a part of of a cohort that got to go to China. I think that was one of my favorite opportunities to learn the different structures of how Chinese institutions are, how the different levels of colleges and universities. There's a sports university just for sports, and also what my research there, or what we were studying, is how do students decide whether they want to study in China or they want to go abroad? Since we had a huge international student population at USC, we could get information from USC, but also that process of, how did you hear about the school? Like, oh, this one school student's like, oh yeah, I applied to Ohio State because my teacher went to Ohio State. So they said that would be good for me. So it's just kind of just seeing that access and how they, acquire information. So that was one of my favorite classes, and as well too, because it allowed us to kind of go a step away from the US higher ed into and that was really much blending into my international education, understanding that, to kind of say, yes, all the different institutions across the world, which, of course, helps me advise international students, helps me advise my students studying abroad, as well as also helping interpret transcripts from international schools. Like, it's just interesting how it can touch a broad base. But I think in general, it's just the experience. As someone who didn't want to ever go back to school again, and I went like, all right, here I go, back again 3 years later. I think that was just kind of the bigger adjustment for me, is trying to prove myself that, yes, this is what I want to do and just want to go into. Yeah, but overall, the experience was great. And I think just meeting the people and having that network really helped.
Thank you for sharing.
Other questions? That was great. I have another question.
Yes.
What kind of skill sets or trainings do individuals need in order to serve in a role like yours?
Oh, so I'm assuming that is it the counseling class still there? Is it taught? I don't know if the counseling class is still there. It was really going back, Princess, to that class too. That was one of the hardest classes, I think, Yes, thank you. Counseling process. Yes, that was one of the hardest classes because one, you had to record yourself advising and counseling someone and hearing use of the scenarios, and it's just really awkward. I'm not a performer, and but I advise them, so I leave it up to them. But I think that was a really great exercise, painful but great exercise in that because it taught you how to be an active listener. Um, Being patient, right? Because you have the answer in your head. You're like, all right, I can anticipate it. Like, especially when you're in an advising for such a long time, you can start anticipating the questions that a student's going to ask and then the what precedes it. But just kind of still taking a step back, be like, no, don't assume, you got to listen, making sure, because everyone comes from different backgrounds, different areas. I think, being in the UC, I was more exposed to a lot of students who have, very much our first gen, very first gen, low income, but really wanting to, move into that different next level and, just hearing everything and kind of learning about resources a little bit more, I think was really helpful. And to, have that understanding and just to listen, again, just listening to the students' stories and listening to kind of what their journey's been if they want to share. I'm never going to pry unless they share with me, but I will always ask, how's your day? Or just little things, kind of the skills I picked up actually with Annenberg when they had to be mandatory advising. Like I had to see a student for 30 minutes and say, all right, let's, because class picking can last 5 minutes. But what's the rest of the conversation going to be about? And then what other opportunities and other resources on campus that they're not aware of that you can help them go to? I think also a big thing is boundaries. Sometimes, some folks, even my peers, I think as a supervisor for students who are still there in the role, there's a lot of boundaries I have to put up to say, okay, yes, I am your supervisor. I'm not your friend. But we still have this professional role, and I'm kind of want to help train them for when they get into their first job as well too. But yeah, and also trying to learn as much as possible, constantly not always having to go directly to your supervisor for answering questions, but again, using your network for other advisors across campus is really helpful to do that too, so that you don't feel like you're alone, because sometimes you can be, and especially since you don't know what questions you're supposed to ask as a new advisor. So going outside and to understand how other folks gives you a better perspective and also kind of helps you build where you want to be as an advisor.
Great. And you sort of touched on this with Nakata, but what resources, organizations, or associates have helped you grow and continue learning about your role and industry?
So yes, Nakata, I haven't been in a while, but hopefully we'll, especially since we're lucky that our department will support us in professional organizations. And I know that's a big jump to big support that they want to do that now for a lot of folks. So we'll probably be doing Nakata. I know next year, I think that's a big one is in Las Vegas. So we'll definitely be doing that as a team. Um, but I think starting small, internal within your advisor, like I said, like we had our own little mini advisor group that I'm on a Teams chat, and we talk about certain issues we're all facing, and then we'll bring it up and we'll kind of see what we can work on it to see if we can talk to some players, because we know everyone has a load on their plate. They have different responsibilities. It could be a lot. So it just depends, being a part of the whether it's, from the provost or whoever is the lead advisor or overseeing all the advisors, but talking about probation committee, talking about orientation, talking about how do we manage, what can we update for these systems, registration, all that stuff. So being a part of those committees do help and connect you with not only the key players within the institution, but also other advisors, so you can kind of see what issues they run into. But for me, I've been a part of also what is called APAHI, which is the Asian Pacific Islander folks in higher education. And there's a lot of history in that, what I really appreciate, because it was started by a lot of faculty and former student affairs professionals within California, but also across the US. And being a part of they had this huge training that they did for folks, and it's called LEAD or LEAP at the time. And it was like a summer intensive, and you just kind of talk about, the challenges you're facing in the industry, the challenge you face as a person of color within, their schools, and how do you kind of make forth and kind of build yourself so you could be a player within the institution. So it was a really great like leadership retreat. Met a lot of folks, within higher ed. So they're not only academic advisors, they're also deans, they're also, presidents of schools, financial aid, it's registrar. So it was just every aspect of, staff and faculty within higher education. And I appreciate that. And I know there's different organizations that also do similar things as well too. But yeah, and then sometimes it's okay to take a break from them. I think sometimes it can get a lot. And I know even being in PASA, it was like, like, you're NASPA, and you're like, okay, that's a lot of people. That's a lot for a convention. I can't do this. Sometimes just the smaller ones, are good to go to, and just kind of, especially if you want to stay in that region, it's a really nice thing to do, to meet. But yeah, I understand that could get overwhelming, but it's okay if you take a pause.
Great. I have just a few more questions, unless anyone else wants to chime in, but I'll go ahead with that. What recommendations do you have for students who are graduating and interested in entering academic advising?
Oh, for graduating into this field, kind of pretty much what I've been talking about is just kind of talking about it and asking folks. If you asked me, it's totally fine. I'll connect you with other folks in my head of like, oh yeah, I have this person. And it not necessarily should be advising, because again, we have those other ancillary roles like that are within the departments. And I have like one student, my former student, who's working as a department analyst within the Department of Chemistry. She still interacts with students, but does a lot of behind the scenes working with faculty. And she really liked that role, even though she did a lot of advising as an undergrad for me. But it's just, there's a lot of different, sometimes you don't know until you go into an institution to see how, understanding the structure, and then to see, what is available. Yeah, and I think that's, pretty much what I would say was just talking to people, using your network, coming to these things to kind of see what's out there. And, just knowing that if you don't get that job the first time, you don't get your dream job the first time, it's okay. You might have to build your way through it. You might have to, like I did, slingshot around something and then come back, come in and come out. And again, I think because the industry is a little bit better in that, if we have what is called like continuing education or extension, they're usually kind of like, oh, they're out there, but not really. It's the same skill set. You still have to advise, you still have to manage students, you still have to go through these things. You have to understand database systems, read data. So being able to work with even career to help you with those transferable skills to talk about it, and to be able to present that. But again, it also does help to know folks within the industry to help you navigate through those kind of the things that we can't see on the surface. That's mostly internal.
Wonderful. And do you anticipate having any open positions in your department that you would be willing to share, whether now or in the future, for our students?
So not in my department directly. We're pretty strong. There's not a lot of turnover since there's only 3 advisors. My director has been there for 16 years. And then I'm second and I'm 6, so, and then my other colleagues 5. So, we've been there for a while, but there are other departments on campus. If they have questions about particular departments and how they function, I'm more than happy to talk about it as well too. Regarding, I think there might be a couple transfer coordinator actually positions in our transfer advising services. So for students who are coming in. So if you really like working with that population and want to be on that other side, of receiving the transfer students and helping them, really make an impact in the 2 or 3 years they get to be there. So if you have questions about that, I can connect you with those folks as well too. But I think that's kind of in the immediate realm. But that one's mostly with student affairs. It's not directly tied to an academic unit, but still, it's a really good role, I think, to kind of, if you just want to get your foot in there in the door. Because at UCI, a lot of people like to jump within departments. So, they kind of move around quite a bit because they like staying there. They like having a pension. So, one of those things that we have to think about that we don't think about until later. But yeah, so if there's anything that you see, I'm more than happy to, kind of give some whatever insight I have or direct you to people who might know about it.
Great. Thank you so much. If there are no more questions, I would like to thank Jen for your time. So insightful to hear your journey on academic advising, and we just appreciate you sharing your expertise and experience in higher education. So thank you for that.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm also going to put in a plug for our upcoming events. The next one will be on Monday, the 7th, which is our Rossier Collegiate Teaching, Teaching with Your Rossier degree. And then in the coming weeks, we'll have more deep dives. So excited to see you all. Thank you.